history as the most strategic blunder that the United States of America showcased
The Oval Office is no stranger to drama. But what unfolded when South African President Cyril Ramaphosa met Donald Trump went far beyond the usual tensions of diplomacy. What was meant to be a new beginning between Washington and Pretoria ended in humiliation, confrontation, and a diplomatic rift that is now being read across Africa as a turning point in how the continent deals with the United States. It began like many high-level meetings do, with cameras flashing, aides standing neatly in line, and lighthearted small talk about golf swings and ceremonial gifts. For a brief moment, the atmosphere felt like a reset, a chance to move past months of growing hostility. Both leaders smiled, the handshakes were firm, and the promise of economic cooperation hung in the air. But that illusion barely lasted 10 minutes. Without warning, Trump shifted from pleasantries to confrontation. From a neat pile of manila folders stacked on the Resolute desk, he produced printed reports, photographs, and video clips. Some came from advocacy groups, others from online sources long accused of pushing selective narratives. Every piece of material pointed to one explosive claim: that the South African government was complicit in violence and dispossession targeting white farmers. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Reporters were ushered out. Advisors leaned forward, their faces hardening. Trump laid the materials across the desk, describing them as proof of state-backed persecution. His voice carried the certainty of someone convinced he was speaking truth. But Ramaphosa did not flinch. In a steady, deliberate tone, he rejected the accusation outright. South Africa's rural violence, he explained, was part of a broader national crime problem affecting black, white, and mixed-race citizens alike. There was no credible evidence of a racial extermination campaign. And as for land reform, he insisted it was guided by constitutional safeguards, not racial revenge. Piece by piece, it began with words. From campaign rallies to policy briefings, Trump singled out South Africa as an example of what he called racially discriminatory governance. He accused Pretoria of marginalizing white citizens and undermining property rights. By framing South Africa's constitutional land reforms as a racial vendetta, he touched a nerve that would never settle. Soon, words became actions. Washington suspended U.S. foreign aid to South Africa, more symbolic than economic but unmistakably political. Pretoria's ambassador was expelled. Even more controversially, the White House created a refugee program tailored specifically for white South Africans claiming persecution. To Pretoria, it was a public challenge to sovereignty, an endorsement of a narrative they rejected as false. Meanwhile, South Africa's foreign policy drifted further from Washington. Pretoria maintained strong ties with China, Russia, and Iran, and often voted against U.S. positions at the United Nations. Trade tensions deepened too, with U.S. tariffs on South African steel and aluminum hitting hard. Negotiations stalled, and Pretoria sought new markets. By the time Ramaphosa's visit was announced, both sides had entirely different goals. For South Africa, it was a chance to reverse the downward spiral with economic deals. For Trump, it was a chance to confront grievances directly, playing to a domestic base that had taken interest in the plight of white farmers. From the moment the two men sat across the Resolute desk, the mismatch of priorities was obvious. Ramaphosa leaned into diplomacy, steady tone, measured phrasing. Trump oscillated between charm and confrontation, moving abruptly from small talk to accusations. The breaking point came when Trump placed those glossy photos and crime reports on the table. He pressed hard, citing advocacy groups and emotional testimony from television. Ramaphosa responded with constitutional law, crime statistics, and parliamentary safeguards. It was a do, but none of it saw daylight. Ramaphosa chose not to push proposals in the middle of a heated sovereignty dispute. Trump brushed aside the brief mentions with only nods. Months of preparation collapsed in minutes. In Pretoria, frustration grew. Business leaders who had anticipated major announcements now faced disappointment. Energy analysts warned that South Africa would likely turn to Qatar or Mozambique for LNG. closing the door on America. What could have been a breakthrough became a lesson. Political discord can derail economic diplomacy. Across Africa, the fallout was immediate. In the Southern African Development Community, leaders framed the meeting as proof that U.S. resets came with risks. In West Africa, Nigeria, and Ghana saw it as a reminder to diversify away from Washington. The African Union quietly pushed the idea that no African state should face Washington alone, but rather with continental unity. The business world read the clash as confirmation that U.S.-Africa economic relations remain vulnerable to American domestic politics. The missed LNG deal was South Africa's loss, but also a warning to the continent. On social media, Africans celebrated Ramaphosa's refusal to bow. Memes and commentary painted him as a leader defending sovereignty against Western pressure. His image was strengthened at home and across the continent. Meanwhile, in Washington, Trump's domestic supporters praised his bluntness. But foreign policy experts admitted the damage. Africa increasingly viewed the U.S. as a partner that imposes its own framing instead of seeking common ground. The consequences were swift. Within weeks, South Africa advanced LNG talks with Qatar and Mozambique, deepened defense discussions with Russia, and expanded trade missions to China. Other African states followed suit, citing the Oval Office clash as justification to broaden their alliances. In the end, what happened that day was more than a meeting gone wrong. It was a shift. Africa once